He starts out by not justifying or apologizing for writing another biography of Paul, which I think is remarkable. It's like saying we can never get enough. It's not that Paul needs to be updated. In fact, that's one thing that N.T. Wright doesn't seem to do, and I appreciate that. We don't need a postmodern version of Paul. We don't need that. If he's inspired, then he stands the test of time. If he's from God, then he speaks to us, even if our world is very different than it was 30 years ago or 50 years ago. Very different than it was, 20 centuries ago. The questions that N.T. Wright starts out, and by the way, he's a conservative Anglican. Okay, Anglican means you're still tied to a certain church credo. Okay, and maybe you know that the background, so he still has a church polity, that is organization, that he has served in as a high-ranking ecclesiastical figure. Although now he's just a research scholar at Oxford, he has served in high position in the Church of England. Okay, now the Church of England is about 70 million in the world. In the American context, it's called Episcopalian Church. In the American context, the Episcopalian Church has gone definitely out on limbs. It has a woman head of the Episcopalian Church here in the United States, and it has had for about 20 or 30 years openly gay as well. So they've gone places. The larger context of Anglican, the Anglican faith, which has only been around since Henry VIII. It's been around since the 16th century. The Church of England split because of political reasons, King of England, from the Catholic Church. So they severed their ties with the popes in Rome, and that's the origins of the Church of England. It started in a political or personal thing of Henry VIII, and it's become a denomination of its own. It's had off and on, relationships, conversations with the Catholic Church, which is the largest presence of the 2 billion people in the world in Christianity as a Christendom as a whole. Catholics still compose 1.2 billion of them, but the Anglican is a significant presence. Most of the conservative Anglicans are not in England and not in the United States. They're in Africa, actually. And so N.T. Wright represents a kind of a fish out of water. But as he is conservative, and I will find disagreement with him on a few theological things, and a few you should be more clear and state your position on this publicly. And he holds back on a couple of sensitive topics. You might guess what they are. They are a homosexual, lesbian, LGBTQ movement, Christendom as a whole, and the Anglican Church, and also, of course, on issues of women's role within the church. He is less than sort of straightforward on 2 critical issues there. But he starts out about another biography of Paul, make it 132, okay, by saying, how did this man come to be a world changer? That's a question. That's a great question. If he's not inspired by God, assuming for a moment, and N.T. Wright doesn't do that he's not from God, how on earth did he become a world changer? Very important. How did this one man have such a radical impact on the last 20 centuries of not only Western civilization, but also the world as a whole? Because Christianity, wherever it's gone, has taken him with him. He has been more influential than names that resonate in the schools of philosophy or academia today, like Plato or Aristotle. Paul of Tarsus has had more influence than these by far. The question is, how on earth has that happened? That's one of the first things he addresses in his introduction. he points out that, think about it, he's only left behind about 80 pages, the way that translators and, you know, have put his works. We have 13 letters of his, and that's it, 80 pages. Now, how on earth have 80 pages, been so influential? What is even more, I guess, important is he's left a slew of, let's call them small, we don't know the numbers, but communities of faith that he planted in a time period of about 30 years, which is staggering. It's just absolutely amazing. Okay. He has two parts of his life, the first half and the second half. And so the term Damascus or Damascus Road event is going to be something we're going to have to examine. What happened, not just the technical things, what happened, but how on earth did that life-changing event change a man that, by all accounts, he wouldn't have been one of the 7 great rabbis of all times. He wouldn't have been one of the top 100 rabbis of all times. He wouldn't have been on the list. And yet, because he aborted that and joined a cultic group, the way it was viewed, everything, he changed the world. One man, the power of one man. So you can go ahead and start thinking in these terms as we start studying his life in earnest. There's 2 halves. There's 2 names, right? There's Saul and there's Paul. And they're not the translation of each other. We've had an occasion to remark about that. Saul is his Jewish name. Paul is his Greco-Roman name. We're going to look at that in more detail when we come to it. And Saul was his career and where he was going for the first approximately 30 years. And then Paul is who he was and how he signed himself. And of course, that speaks of language too. Saul is his Jewish side, while Paul is his Greco-Roman side. So we have, in a sense, two versions, and yet they're completely consistent with each other in one way, at least. He was serving God. Both sides of his life, he was serving God. Now, he was thought he was serving God fully in the first half, and then he was directed differently in the second half of his life to serve him fully. Okay, so Saul becomes Paul. You can look at it that way. Saul of Tarsus becomes Paul of the Roman Empire or the Greco-Roman world. And we're going to see that in our study. He talks about the role of religion in the first century, and it's very different definition than our own. He's going to say this: religion consisted of God-related activities that, along with politics and community life, held a culture together. Very important aspect we're going to see. Religion wasn't something you went to 3 times a week. Religion wasn't something you just simply put on like a new set of clothes. It involved everything you were: politics, community life, and it was a glue that held culture together. Romans will be in favor of religion because even though they're very tolerant about whatever religion you have, they think that everybody needs religion. They're gonna say that. Okay, it's an activity. He's going to point out, which is a very important point. He's going to say this man, as you study him, his life, is most unlikely to have been a world changer, and yet that's what he turns out to be. Most unlikely. He doesn't have the biography. He's the most educated of the apostles. He's a lot of things, but he's not the one you would think that would change a world with his words and his travels, both. And this is a question we're going to ask more in depth. What happened to him on the road to Damascus? Because N.T. Wright brings it up. Did Paul change religion on the road to Damascus? What happened? Conversion. What does that mean? Conversion or what's the other word? We're going to examine that because N.T. Wright brings that up in his introductory comments as well. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and warn you that on page 7 of his introduction, he's going to say something that allows me to recommend his reading, among other things. Unlike many scholars that I think we've had occasion to mention in other classes, only think 4 of Paul's letters in the New Testament are really his. They question the authorship of some, if not many, of the 13 letters in the New Testament. They go contrary to the sorry, I had an email. I thought it was Parker, but I don't see him. They go contrary to the early church fathers who took a hard look at the authorship of so many works that were circulating, and even some that were under the name of Paul, and they threw them in the trash. They got rid of them. They kept the 13 that we have. Of course, I'm leaving Hebrews out because we're not sure of its composition. But here's what he says, middle of page 7. I hasten to add that I still see Paul's letters as part of Holy Scripture. Holy, i.e. divine, inspired Scripture. I appreciate that because so many scholars are not there, or at least many are, not all. I still think, and then he adds, that prayer and faith are vital, non-negotiable parts of an attempt to understand them, just as I think that learning to play the piano for oneself is an important part of trying to understand Schubert's impromptus. He uses these metaphors, these similes, several times, and I don't know if this one caught you because I was reading it to you, but they're effective. Where he says, listen, it's not just a scholar or a scholarly view that says, I think this one's by Paul, but it's also a mixture of both study, bringing a skeptical mind to, is this by Paul or not? What are the signs that it is, or the criticisms that it is not? He brings a metaphor to life that helps understand why faith and prayer are important parts too of your not just reading Paul or understanding his life, but also of participating in the faith that was Paul's, which is the thing that makes him a world changer. It's by the work of God. Now, here's what he says is the purpose of your textbook for this course. I want to know who Paul really was. Okay, not all the movies, not all the novels. By the way, there are dozens of novels, historical novels. I want to know who Paul really was, what he thought he was doing, why it worked, because it did. The one thing you can't say is it worked. And within that, what was the nature of the transformation that he underwent on the road to Damascus? So that's the purpose of his writing, the umpteenth biography of Paul. So that's his purpose. Now, watch out. In the next paragraph, he goes ahead to talk about heaven. And let me alert you to the fact that he's a proponent of restored earth, not a millennialist as such, but same concept. That is, there's going to be a period here on earth when there's a restored earth. He's a restored earth. So this is where he and I disagree theologically, and maybe we'll have a chance to address that. But that really comes up more in Pauline letters than it does in a study of Paul's life. He goes too far, in my opinion. But you will be the judge. Please read on page 7, this first inkling of that being something that I would question theologically about his viewpoint on Paul. He talks about the origins in Tarsus. We're going to cover that today in my notes. And words like Cilicia and Cydnus and Asia are going to pop up in our study. And so you're going to, as you read these pages, you're going to face his quick look at the context in which Paul grew up, with lots of religious options and a new fad called emperor worship, and what does it mean to be a Pharisee, and how much of a Pharisee was he, and what can we guess about his father? Was his father a Pharisee? Definitely a strong Orthodox Jews, strict Jews. He definitely was that. He's going to talk about Tarsus. He's going to talk about tent making a living by sewing tents. So I think you're going to enjoy very much the introduction that he uses here to kind of immediately engage you. And he does a better job to pulling you in to I want to know more. There's so much about Paul. It's the apostle that we know the most about. I can't do a course on the lives of the other apostles, to be honest with you. There are books on the other apostles and what we know about them from the New Testament, but there's not a bevy of biographies like there is for the Apostle Paul. But we're backing up here. We're looking at the beginning. So here's a quick look, and you can have your Bibles if you wish to Acts 21, some of the references that are made here, and be sure to interrupt me anytime. If you have 10 seconds to explain who you are, in a tense moment, Paul will tell a commander in Jerusalem who's got a hold of him with Roman soldiers, who are you? And why is this Jewish mob trying to stone you? And why are you causing a commotion? If you've got 10 seconds, you're going to quickly summarize, who you are. If somebody asks me, depending on the context, I just give you the context of Acts 21 here. Who are you? I would say I'm an American citizen, born in Nashville, Tennessee, but raised on a mission field in Italy, and I'm a Christian. And that's much I would have time to say. If I'm a follower of Christ, and that's it. Paul, in a tense moment on the steps of the Antonia fortress in Jerusalem, when a Roman commander asked him to state who he is, he says the following: I am a Jew of Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city, of no simple city, of a very well-known city, I guess is a term. So let's start our study of Paul from his beginnings here. The question of Paul's roots has been debated for a long time by all those that have written biographies, and in particular 19th century historians. Paul never declares that he was actually born the way we use the English word born, okay? He didn't say he was born there. Later in time, there will be the first church historian that will say, that's in the early 4th century, that will Historia Ecclesiastica, that will say that his family came from Gischala in Galilee. We don't have any evidence of that in the 1st century, and our source is again somebody that, even though he's a historian, church historian, lives about 2.5 centuries after Paul, to say the least. So we're left with reliable, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia. He never says he was born there. However, he strongly defends in his life and in his writings his Jewish background. And thus, we must suppose that he was because of his strong defense, a dispersion Jew, or the word is diaspora. Diaspora is the technical word. The English translation of that is dispersion. There were two kinds of Jews in the 1st century: dispersion and Palestinian Jews. Palestinian means within the boundaries of the Holy Lands. And then there were the majority of Jews. Of course, so this is a very important point. More Jews lived outside of Palestine than in it. More Jews lived outside of the boundaries of the Holy Lands, so to speak, which was from Lower Judea till Damascus. Damascus represented, actually, and we'll have maps here that I'll put before you, but the upper confines. You were leaving the promised land, you were leaving the Holy Lands when you got to Damascus. It was like the upper echelon of it, upper border of it. Paul was no doubt a diaspora or dispersion Jew, but we don't know if he was born outside in Tarsus. He clearly says that he's a citizen of Tarsus. That is something that is clearly from the language that he uses in clarifying himself, and he's proud of it too. So here's a map that you're looking at, one of many. If you look up dispersion or Jewish dispersion of the 1st century AD, you can see this Mediterranean world of the eastern side. You don't see Spain and others, but you see a lot of dots on this map. And of course, the biggest dots, and by the way, the dots represented Jewish colonies, strong Jewish presences within urban centers. Okay, and what you have by the 1st century AD, by the turn of the 1st century AD, is more Jews living outside of Palestine, and they're just about every city, major city and middle-sized city, and sometimes smaller cities, there is a Jewish community which sticks together since the return from the exile. They have done so much. So if you're looking at the map, please find Alexandria of Egypt, right there at where the Nile River breaks out into the delta and flows in the Mediterranean. Do you see Alexandria? That's a major city of the 1st century AD. It was the 2nd largest city in the empire, had about 1 million citizens, and nobody had ever seen a size. That city, that size, Rome doubled it. Rome was the biggest city in the world at the time with 2 million. Alexandria was the 2nd largest city. And there's a big dot there because there was a community of Jews that at least one source says was about 70,000. That's a very large, that's like a city, whole districts of Alexandria that were Jewish communities, Jewish synagogues, etc. But you see, even look around the coast of North Africa, where it says Cyrene, there are even presences of the Jewish dispersion there. Keep going along the coast of North Africa to Carthage, which is modern day Libya. You find the presences there. Of course, you find a large presence in Promised Land, in the Holy Lands. Look at Jerusalem. That's the 2nd big dot. But by the way, some of the surprising presence of Jews, look down the Nile, or actually the Egyptians would say up the Nile. Look just about off the map. You see Elephantine? That was an island, and there was actually at one time a Jewish temple there that was destroyed because they couldn't go to Jerusalem, so somebody built in the history briefly a Jewish temple there, but there was a Jewish community down there too, up the Nile or down the Nile. Look where else? So look at in Babylon. Look over there by the Tigris and Euphrates River, right? Modern day Iraq. In Babylon, in the capitals of the Persians, Susa. You see Susa? Do you see Antioch? Keep coming up. Antioch, Assyria, and of course there's Tarsus. You see it? Tarsus just around the bend from Antioch of Syria. Then some major Jewish communities at Ephesus along the Asia Minor coast. Jewish communities in Corinth, in Athens, and in Rome, and even on the coast of what we call France today. You see it over there by Marseille, way up in the left-hand corner? So there you are. There were more Jews living outside of Palestine than in it. And Paul was one of those dispersion Jews. That's what he was. But that doesn't mean he was, let's use some of the terms we use today, liberal. One assumes the further you are away from Jerusalem, the more liberal you are, or less orthodox you are in your practices. That would not be correct. In downtown Jerusalem, there are some that have begun to read the Old Testament in Greek instead of Hebrew, and those are considered kind of, well, not quite kosher. And in downtown Jerusalem, there are going to be some priests of the temple that are beginning to adopt some Greek modes of dressing or entertainment things. And so they're going to be, we can't just paint with a wide brush. Those that were in Jerusalem and the surroundings were Orthodox Jews, while the rest were kind of liberal Jews, I guess, or less attached to the customs of old and to the Mosaic law and its practices. That is not going to be the case. Here's another simpler map of the same world. Now you see the whole Mediterranean Sea, which by the first century was completely owned by Roman legions, by the Roman Empire. As of late, Roman Republic had morphed into the most powerful political military presence in the history of the ancient world. Look at all the dots as we're focused on the Asia Minor or Asia. Look at Jerusalem, Alexandria of Egypt. Look at Damascus, large Jewish community there. That's why Paul goes there, to seek out runaway Christians. He goes there to find them because they think they're safe, and he's going to make sure they're not. Okay, when he goes up there, but he's he's going to get to the outside of Damascus and not further than that. But look at Antioch of Syria, large Jewish community there, and then all those dots along the coastal areas in Central Asia Minor, along the Balkan Peninsula, modern day Greece, and then Rome. So there you go. Tarsus. Tarsus, he says, a no mean city. He's proud of it. I'm born in Nashville, and I'm proud to sing country music, even though I may not be as good as some of you are. I like jazz too, but that doesn't, I'm not going to deny my roots. So there you go. No mean city. He's disparaging it to give it importance. And here's the point. He wasn't exaggerating. Just because today Tarsus is not a major city you and I know about in the world at all. In fact, the modern day Turkish city of Tarsus is not a large center, but it is a medium city of the Turkish landscape. The Ottoman Turks came several centuries ago, and the modern day country of Turkey has been Atatürk made an Islamic state back at the turn of the 20th century, just after the turn of the 20th century. But we were interested in Tarsus of the time of Paul. That's where he says he's proud to be from. It's in a plain called the Cilician Plain. It's just removed from the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and it has right behind it a large chain of mountains called the Taurus Mountains that are just a few miles away. And there's one major pass through the mountains right behind Tarsus it's called the gates of Issus. And that Issus is a remarkable name in history because nearly 3 centuries before, at the end of the 4th century before Christ, Alexander the great military leader of the Greeks, had a major battle with the Persian king and his forces, and he nearly lost, but he turned things around with brilliant military maneuvers, and he again defied the odds and defeated the Persians, and continued then for the next few years until he conquered all of the Persian Empire, which is one of the most remarkable military feats in ancient history, or of all time, actually. So right just north of Paul's hometown is a major battlefield of world history in which the Persians surprisingly lose to the much smaller forces of Alexander the Great and his hoplites, his soldiers. So there's a narrow pass in the mountains. If you're going to go along the coast of Turkey or Asia Minor back then, you go through the Cilician Gates, which is a pass through the mountains that cuts north-south. And that will put you on a major trade route. One of the things that N.T. Wright will emphasize is the commercial importance of the city of Tarsus. Paul's not exaggerating at all. His city is important, I'm told that, my birth city of Nashville has really developed significantly in the last few years, not just because of country music, but other things as well. In fact, the downtown area is being revitalized completely. So it's changed its position in the American landscape in the last few decades. Well, Tarsus was on a major trade route. There were about 3 of them in Asia. One on the south coast, which is where Tarsus is, a road that caravans coming from the east carrying various products to the sea and to the major ports of Ephesus and others. And then from there, they went on to be loaded on ships to go to Rome. Everything always ends up in Rome. All roads lead to Rome, and all merchants want to take products to Rome in these days because it's the biggest city in the world. But it's also, of course, the trade route means there's also armies that come through it too. And that's one of the reasons there's a major battle just nearby there in the plain. The other 2 trade routes are in the middle of Asia Minor and on the north coast of Asia Minor. But there are 3 major trade routes on that area that we were looking at. In fact, let me just back up here. Asia Minor is where you see Asia Minor is where you see Antioch, okay? And then turn the corner, and all of that is Asia Minor. And on that, what's called Turkey today, okay? There's a trade route on the coastal road, there's a trade route in the middle, and there's a trade route on the north coast. So that's what Tarsus is on, one of the major 3 routes. The weather was not that great. It's very humid. Sounds like Alabama to me. I don't know. But so there were a lot of complaints in the writings of the time about not being very healthy. And so I guess we would have advised them to move where? Arizona or Florida, right? But it's interesting to read about, comments of writers of the time. Today, if you go visit at Tarsus, and by the way, I haven't been able to, the reason being that it's near the border with Syria. Syria has been in a civil war for quite a while. ISIS was defeated, but it's still a very volatile area of rebellions, various tribal leaders. So it's the Turks watch that border very carefully, but it's not a place where I can take a group or have gone myself yet, but maybe one day it'll be open to it. It's too close to what is a continual civil war area. And by the way, the Assad regime in Syria has beaten back, thanks to the Russians, the rebellion, but it's still very tentative. So it's landlocked now, Tarsus is, but back then there was a major river called the Cydnus River. That Cydnus River evidently silted up, and now it's landlocked. But there was a lake that the Cydnus River created, the Regma, as it was called back then, and in it there were docks and an arsenal. And so for that reason as well, it was not only a city on an important land route, but it was also easily accessible from at least mid-sized ships, small ships, mid-sized ships. There weren't many large grain ships that docked here. At least that wasn't the trait. Be sure to stop me anytime you have a comment or question. I'm going to go ahead and take a break in about 5 or 10 minutes to not push it with you. So a lot of history today. Is that okay with you? It's not about dates, but if you were to ask, if I were to ask you, tell me your life, you would say I was born in the city of that I loved or importance. I grew up, I went to school. Um, Tarsus had had an interesting history. He's bragging about it. Roman Tarsus. Um, it was taken by Rome. It had become Roman about 105 or 10 years before Paul was born. We're going to place Paul, since we don't know his birth date, as being born around the middle of the first decade AD. So, for testing purposes, around C.5. We don't know the exact year, okay? And so it's around the first decade AD. So most commentators think that he doesn't predate the birth of Jesus, but he barely probably postdates the birth of Jesus, which is around, by the way, 3 BC, not 0. Our dating system is a bit off. Don't let that confuse you. Romans had arrived with their legions in 103 BC, and a few decades later, a very important Roman general by the name of Pompey, with a Y, 67 BC, was there, ruled for a while briefly. The second most important position in the Roman Empire is going to be a governor. However, in 67, there's no empire yet. It's still Roman Republic. And there are several very powerful generals that command legions that are wanting to be the first emperor of Rome. Pompey is one of those. He's going to lose. He's going to lose a battle with the other pretender to the throne of Rome, to the empire of Rome, which is about to be. And his name is Julius Caesar. Okay, but Pompey was one of the very powerful generals. He will be in Tarsus and for a brief time. And it was pronounced capital of a Roman province, the province of Cilicia, it was called, in the general region of the world that's called Asia Minor back then. So, stop me if I have not been clear. One of the key literary figures of the Roman world is called Cicero. He's a great Roman orator, writer, and politician. And watch out if you're in politics, it's a risky time to be in politics. Although I don't know a time in Rome when it wasn't risky to be a politician, but definitely right now, because the Roman Republic is in the last few years of transition to being ruled by one man. And yet Rome was founded on the concept of no man shall rule Rome. They elected 2 consuls to rule every year, but now by the year 50 AD, when Cicero is there briefly as a major Roman politician figure, the Roman Republic is dying. It's about to be phased out in blood and in violence and in inner fighting. And the Roman Empire is about to be born. Maybe that is an introduction to Julius Caesar. You may have heard of him. He would have been the first emperor of Rome, but he's not. The title that he took for himself when he walked into Rome and ignored Roman law, which said don't bring your legions anywhere close to Rome, you have to leave them beyond the river Rubicon. And he violated the law intentionally because he was basically wanting to say, okay, it's time for me by myself to rule Rome. And he will walk into Rome, he will be given the title dictator for life. Now, they had used the term dictator before, but never for life. Basically, he was like an emperor, but he only lasted 3 years because he was assassinated in 44 BC. And that's the end of his story. It was quickly phased out because he was killed. But he renamed Tarsus briefly, as Roman powerful generals and emperors will do. They renamed cities left and right. And usually people were not too averse to that because it meant that the general or the emperor would bestow on them major tax breaks or benefits, or rebuild some major parts of the city that had fallen disuse. So he called it Iuliopolis. Polis means city. Julio was that's the family name, Julius Caesar. So they named it the city of the Julian family. So there you go. But in the aftermath of the assassination of Julius Caesar, there were those that said they were avenging him. Mark Antony and was one of them, and of course Octavian being another one. And so there were a lot of jockeying. Tarsus was a city in the middle of all this upheaval of Roman politics and who was going to be the first emperor of Rome. So it was sacked. It was then rebuilt. It's risky business to side with one general or with one person, because you might. But in the end, Tarsus saw a better days, so that when Paul was born there, he was proud to be from it. It was made a free city. This in the Roman Empire, as it will become an empire in the year 31, when Octavian defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra in a naval battle. It will become a free city. That means it gets to do its own laws. And more importantly, it's great for business. Think of that in terms of tent making. If Paul was raised in a family tradition of tent making from his father or grandfather, then being in a no-tax city is very much of an advantage. That's something you might want to consider for example, Lydia in Philippi. That's another tax-free city, Roman colony. There were not every city in the world had the status of Roman colony or a free city. There were a few, and it was great for business, no matter whether you were a convicted Greco-Roman or Roman or not.